shoot back to the mid-'80s, okay, the 70s and 80s. Afghanistan, here it is. It was at the time about the size of Texas, okay, and at the time about the population, about 16 million people before the Soviet invasion. And Afghanistan, of course, shared a common border with the Soviet Union because a lot of this, you know, these were all Soviet countries with the exception of Iran. These were all under Soviet control. So there's this big border. Okay, so imagine living in Texas and you're sharing a border with the Soviet Union. And populated basically by farmers. This is an agrarian society. You know, there are some cities, but it's fairly underdeveloped, and these are farmers. But these are farmers with a terrific tradition. Their grandfathers fought the British. Their great-grandfathers fought the British. Their great-great-greats, you know, fought Tamerlane, and before that Alexander the Great. They're a warrior people. I was quite impressed with them, but I was there at a different time than today. Today's story is much different. But they're a tough, warrior-like people. And if you've ever seen the movie, The Man Who Would Be King, which is a great movie, it's about a Kipling story. It's about these two adventurers, these British soldiers, who go into this territory and meet these tough people. So anyway, that's the setting. And these are, all of these photographs except one are actually mine for my camera. This is as I entered in, and I'll explain to you how that all happened. Afghanistan, you say, well, how did they fight a war with the Soviets, you know? And why is it difficult for us? Most of it is, it's very rugged, terrifically rigorous, a lot of mountainous territories, a lot of places to hide here, a lot of places to go. Of course, there are a number of plains too, but they're surrounded by mountain ranges. So Afghanistan, if you want to have a guerrilla war, or you want to hide out, or you want to, you know, hunker down, Afghanistan's a good place to do that. I was a fellow in infectious disease at the NIH, and I started off on my research career, and I thought, gee, I've never really done cool. I want to do some cool stuff, and I looked at, so I was able to wrangle a year of administrative leave, and I went and took flight lessons. I, you know, traveled around the world, and I'd work off and on and make a little money, then I'd go travel, and I wanted an adventure, and I looked, I said, well, there's adventure in, you know, Nicaragua, but I couldn't figure out who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. And there's the Mideast, and I couldn't figure out who the good guys and the bad guys were. Do you know? And there's Ireland, you know, Northern and Southern Ireland. I'm like, and then I found this Afghanistan thing, and I go, wow, these were simple farmers invaded by the nasty Soviets, right? Yeah, you're filming this, and you're going to get me in trouble. So I said, this looks pretty black and white, and there's some volunteer organizations. This big superpower, you know, invaded these guys because they wanted influence, they wanted access to this warm water port. This looks like a good. So I got hooked up with what's called International Medical Corps, and at the time, their only project actually was Afghanistan. And I was the second volunteer physician to go inside Afghanistan through the organization, and I'll explain more about that. But it's a very rugged, beautiful place. Now the Afghans, this is a picture of Bushkazi. Bushkazi kind of typifies the Afghan spirit. This is the game that's played, and it's been played for centuries by the Afghans, and it's a rugged game. It's practically no rules. You grab a headless goat carcass, you and your team, you grab that thing and you see this, here's a carcass, this guy's got it, his buddies are here, these other guys are chasing him, they're going to try to grab it from him, and they're whipping him in the face, and they're whipping his horse, and their horse are biting his horse, and it's rugged, and people get killed and injured, but they love this, you know, it's kind of their version of American football. So, Bushkazi, let me talk about it, because it, again, typifies the Afghan spirit. From Boz Kushi for goat killing. Ancient game, and it's basically an imitation of mounted warfare. The matches in the old days used to be over miles and miles. Now they're done in giant stadiums. They're usually followed by wrestling matches, since in mounted warfare, right, you fight for a while in a horse fight, then you fall off, and then you finish the job on your feet. So the object is to be the first team to pitch a headless calf across the opposite team's goal. So there are goals. It's not like a soccer goal, but you ride that, you get that carcass, and you try to make your way across the field, dump that carcass in that circle, and then your team, you know, has won that part of the deal. Games sometimes last, the traditional games now, they'll last, you know, for a few hours, but the traditional games played in the countryside, they may last a week. Serious injury is common. People get killed. Winners are awarded chapans, you know, you get a special cloak and stuff. And they only allow stud horses. I mean, none of this sissy gelding mare stuff. Right? These are all studs. And they're highly trained. And bushkazi is still a big deal today in Afghanistan. Let's face it, Afghanistan's been in chaos for the last 30 years. However, these horses, very specifically trained, very well trained, they can cost up to $100,000, $200,000 for a super-de-duper horse. And what will happen is there'll be bushkazi teams sponsored by rich people and companies and things like this. But in the old days, it was just, you know, stud horses. And these horses are trained to do all kinds of things. High-performance horses owned by wealthy people, and they're loaned out to riders. It's almost like polo today. Yeah. The high-goal polo players ride fancy horses, and they're sponsored. Horses are highly trained, and they will kick and bite on command, and they will bump on command. So you've got to go, right? You're riding this way, and I'm on the other team. I come up with you, and I tell my horse, bite him on the face, or bite that horse on the ear, or kick him in the side. You know, it's a rough game. Or knock you over and grab the carcass. You can charge, bump, beat, and whip each other, and they usually carry the whip in their mouth. And they get close to you, and they're going to do whatever they can do to mess with you while somebody else from your team grabs the goat, or you grab the goat. A few rules: no tripping your opponent's horse with a rope. They're very, you know, they're like us. We respect our horses. We like our horses. These are really good horses. Don't do any nastiness like break a horse's leg. You can beat on your opponent, but you can't beat the hand, because the hand is holding the goat. You can beat him in the face or on the chest or on the back, kick him in the leg, but you don't mess with his hand. That's not fair. No tying the carcass to the saddle. That's cheating. Here we go, and here this guy's got the carcass, and these things are heavy. It's
oh my
carcass.
Goodness.
So he's riding to beat the band. This guy looks like he's after him. These are some of his teammates. You know, they'll try to protect him. They'll ride, you know, what's that called? They'll ride guard or something. Anyway, let's talk about the history, because this helps to explain the Afghans. I'm going to go fast because there are a ton of slides, and you holler at me when you want me to shut up. And if you have a question or a comment, just interrupt. So 2000 BC, the Aryans from Central Asia come into Afghanistan, the first, and a lot of bloodshed. These are the first recorded populist movements in Afghanistan. Nobody knew what was there at the time, but apparently it was a bloody thing. 2000 BC, the city of Kabul, which is ancient, was first established. Zoroaster, we've all heard of. It was sort of pre-Judeo-Christian, but monotheistic religion comes to the region. 550, the Persians, you know, Darius the Great invades. And when you read some of these commentaries by the writers at the time of Darius the Great, they're complaining. They're going, God, these people, they just won't give up, you know. They're ferocious, they're nasty. So Darius the Great didn't stay too long. And then 330 BC, Alexander the Great, who conquered everything, he invades Afghanistan, and he's like, what is the deal here? So what he did, he was very smart, right? So what he did when he get into a situation like this, he made deals, and he made his officers marry into the you know, like the commander's daughter and the king's daughter and the princesses. So they did a lot of marrying. So they had a number of Greek soldiers, and Alexander said, you're going to go marry here, and you're going to marry here, and we're going to control this region. Smart, right? Make friends with the powerful people. But there was a lot of discussion about how these were fearsome people. A lot of deals made as well. Then we move on to 246 BCE, and independent rule is set up. It begins to fragment a little bit. The Persians re-invade, again, unsuccessfully. This is one of Darius's grandkids. 652, you know, 600 is Muhammad, right? So the Arab armies come into Afghanistan to teach Islam, to spread Islam. Now, militarily, they didn't stay very long. What stayed was the religion, Islam, okay? The people adopted it, and it stayed. And today, still it's a Muslim nation, a mixture of Shia and Sunni. Most of it, where I was mainly Sunni. 800 AD, Islam as a religion predominates in Afghanistan, and it was somewhat of a unifying force. Everybody could agree, we're all going to fight with one another because that's what the Afghans do, but we could agree, you know, we got a religion that we're hanging on to. And actually between 960 and 1030, because Afghanistan was such a tough place and not a good place to invade, it became one of the major centers of Islamic power and civilization. And then 1220, Genghis Khan invades. And the same thing, the commentaries are that this is a tough deal. You know, they just don't roll over and go away. They're tough people. So what does he do? He does the smart thing. He destroys the infrastructure, irrigation systems, turns the farmlands into deserts. But there was constant revolt, didn't stay too long. It wasn't a permanent incursion. 1370, Timurids from Tamerlane. Another great conqueror in that area, constant revolt and fighting, wasn't very successful. And then, between about 1500 and 1700, we're now getting into more modern times where the great game is going to begin between Russia and England. The Persians and the Indian armies are looking for control in Afghanistan. Why? Because of money, right? Jewels, everything from malachite to emeralds, and the silk trade. Money, money, money. Trade, that's where everybody's going to get money. Now, the other thing that happens is what happens at about 1600, Elizabeth I talks to her advisors and says, yeah, we need trade, and we need, you know, the British Empire became wealthy because of its involvement overseas. So they created what at the time wasn't called, but later came to be known as the British East India Company, which was kind of part of it was an independent company, but really protected by and fostered by the British government as well. It was kind of a partnership. And at one point, the British East India Company was huge, controlled most of India, other parts of that part of the world, and parts of Africa, but using British soldiers and British armies, and it was kind of a, you know, collective agreement between this independent company, which was in large part controlled by the British government. So, for the first time in about 1747, under Ahmad Shah, who was a famous hero, the Afghanistan tribes unite. There are all these different tribes fighting amongst one another, but they get together and they say, you know what, we can do better with all these invaders. We're always dealing with outside invaders because of the Silk Route and everything else. Let's unite. And they united, and they cooperated. Between 1750 and 1830, self-rule with infighting. You know, they're tough people and they fight with each other. But it was still one Afghanistan, usually under one king. 1800s, the Great Game. The struggle between Great Britain and Russia for control of Afghanistan. Russia wanted an Indian Ocean port. And Russia still wants it. You know, that's what's going on in Crimea. Right. I mean, you want a warm water port, and you want involvement in the silk trade. So Russia wanted an Indian port. Russia also was interested in India. India, riches. And who controlled India? The Brits. So Afghanistan was right in the middle. So Russia's like, let's get over here, maybe we can take over India. The Brits worried about it obsessively. And that is the reason why the Brits, 3 different times, launched an invasion in Afghanistan, starting in 1839, culminating in the 20s. They said, we better get control of Afghanistan. If we got control of Afghanistan, we can keep control of the Russian Empire. That's how we're going to keep ourselves safe. That ended up being a bad idea. So anyway, so here we go again. Now this is modern day Afghanistan, Pakistan. Well, at the time it was bigger and it came down here. Pakistan, of course, was part of the Indian Empire. So it really was kind of British India here, Afghanistan here, China, Iran, and this was Russia. So Russia needed this. If they could get this, they could launch an invasion, take over India, hopefully. They could use this militarily as support. They could use trade, and they could interrupt the Silk Route. They could even encourage incursions up into China. So militarily, strategically, particularly economically, everybody wanted control of this area. So now we start with the first Anglo-Afghan war. First of 3 wars. Guess who lost, didn't do well in all 3 wars? The Brits. They didn't do well. They never prevailed. Now, when was this? We're talking Elizabeth and Victoria. This is at the height of British power. The great British Empire that ruled the seas, and they couldn't control this little country the size of Texas with these tough farmers. Does that make you think? Yeah, it makes you think like, wow, these are the guys, when the Soviets invaded in 1979, the Afghans ended up kicking them out, 12 years later. Makes you think, doesn't it? So, anyway, the first one, it was kind of cluster. But anyway, Britain went in there mainly because the East India Company wanted control of Afghanistan. So it was a business deal. It was a business decision. Let's get in there, get control. No big deal. We'll just subjugate the locals. Well, they didn't talk to Alexander the Great. They didn't talk to Tamerlane. They didn't talk to Genghis Khan. They didn't talk. These guys said, "Oh, be careful. Don't be careful what you wish for." So anyway, so General Elphinstone, I'll tell you about him, commander of the Kabul garrison. They put this guy in charge. And now we think of the Brits as tough and resolute and everything. After they get in there and get in trouble, this is what he says to his next in command as they're trying to get out. Listen to this. If anything occurs, for God's sake, clear the passes quickly that I might get away. Does that sound like a brave British general? You know? That sounds to me like those are the words of a desperate man.
Yeah.
So actually the real story on Elphinstone, he came out of retirement. He was actually an invalid. They think he might have been a little bit demented. But he was having some monetary problems, so he had to come back out of retirement. He was well connected, you know how British society worked at the time. So he said, I got to get back in the army. They go, oh, okay, well, you're a little old. His last duty had been in 1815 in the Battle of Waterloo.
Oh my goodness.
Way before. He said, no, I need this. So, and they all said, well, he's a little too, all the experts said, well, he's not capable of doing this. But he was aristocracy. He had enough connections to get everybody else out of the way, so he did become commander of the Kabul garrison. So that was part of the problem. Biggest part of the problem was that the Afghans are Afghans. Anyway, so I'll talk more about this. 1878, so they kicked the Brits out. They came back in 1878 for the same reasons, and they set up this, they made some incursions, you know, Abdur Khan, they set him up, and he can rule locally and Britain will direct foreign policy. Well, that didn't last very long before they had to go. So what happened? Here's Elphinstone. This is a few years before he actually took command. Again, an invalid, physically wasn't in shape, too old, maybe mildly demented according to them. And Remnants of the Army is a great book by Elizabeth Butler, and it talks about this war. What happened basically, they went in there and they made some initial incursions, and the Afghans were just like, oh, what's going on here? And then they got mad. They said, who are you? You're invaders. Our ancestors fought against invaders. We don't want you here anymore. And they got together and they made some deals with the Brits. They said, what are you doing here? And they went first into Kabul, where they had set up shop. And one of the senior tribal leaders went to see Sir Alexander Burnes, senior military officer, because the king's people said, well, go talk to these guys. Tell them, well, what are they doing here? Why are they here? You know, because when they came in, they didn't meet a whole lot of resistance. They just sailed in and went to Kabul and started setting up shop. And he went to Sir Burnes, who was a senior political officer, said, I'd like to talk to you. I'm from, you know, representing them. And he said, quote, you have brought an army into the country, but how do you propose to take it out again? And Burnes said, oh, well, we're England. And so with that, he said, well, we don't like it, we'd like you to leave. And with that, he killed Burnes and his family and everybody else in the room. And then they went after the garrison, because they thought they were there and were going to be there a little time and do some trading. They didn't realize the British had come to stay. So, murdering him with several of his staff and family. So then the crisis came in December 23rd, when MacNaughton, who was another representative who took over Burnes, persuaded to attend a meeting with the Afghan, they called them rebels, they weren't Afghan rebels, they were Afghans representing the tribal leadership, to discuss how to resolve the situation. And after they told him they didn't want the Brits there, they murdered him and his group. So the Brits began to wake up and they said, gee, this is not good. So Elphinstone said, we need to get the heck out of here. So he left some senior British people and their families as hostages and talked to the Afghans, said, look, we're going to leave right away. Will you give us safe passage? The Afghans said, oh, sure, we'll give you safe passage. And we'll get our hostages back and we'll be safe. Yeah, no problem. So they started to march out and they engaged in full-fledged warfare because they were attacked on every side, all along the way. They were headed towards Jalalabad, which is here near the Afghan border, where there was a British garrison right across the border. And they start off with 16,000 total people between British troops and hangers-on and Indian troops. And it's recorded as the single worst disaster in British military history. They basically all were killed, with the exception of a doctor. He was and this is him, Dr. Bryden. And what happened was, the stories are mixed, but what it looks like happened, they started to, attack them, and the Brits, fought back and everything, but the Afghans were tough, and they were shooting from the hills and everything. Bryden was the last survivor, and they finally whittled them all down to a group of 65, and the officers said, oh, we got to get out of here, and they massacred them all. They kept Bryden, and there's several stories of what really happened, but probably the correct story is the local commander, I can't remember his name, he took Bryden, he said, hang on, he was wounded. He helped him out, and they patched up his head, he was wounded on the head, and they said, listen, I have a message for you, I want you to do something for me. We're going to let you go, you got a horse, and we're going to follow you for a while, make sure you're okay. I want you to go back to England and tell, I think it was Victorian, tell your queen, we don't want anybody in our country who's not Afghan. We don't come back again. What are you doing, So give her that message. Will you tell her for me, please, that, and he said, yeah. And so he rode away and arrived in Jalalabad. They saw this figure all bleeding and all beat up, and of course they gave him a little bit of a, they followed him for a while, then they took off, and they see him and they come riding out and get him, and he gave the message to the Queen. He said, they don't want us there. But it was the biggest disaster in military history. Now granted, Elphinstone, who was a little bit demented, probably should take some responsibility for that. And you know what happened to all the hostages? Everybody. So anyway, only survivor. And there he is. Now, does he look a little intimidated to you? Look at that. Look at this.
He does not look comfortable.
This is a couple of months after. He's back in England, giving his report. He just doesn't look like the swashbuckling combat surgeon that you expect him to be, as a British officer. Poor guy. Anyway, and here's a lot of paintings about this. And look, here the Brits trying to retreat, and here the Afghans taking them apart. So just some interesting quotes. There were a few other straggler survivors, but they were mainly like Indians and sepoys and some people who were still alive and they straggled into Jalalabad, but most of the rest of them were killed. Just they made the breach, discovered, and this is also him describing, night was suddenly rent with musket flashes, because the Afghans said, yeah, we'll let you go ahead. And then they
just ambushed them.
It was a
An
little white
alternate version of the truth.
Anyway, silent flashing Afghan blades in the moonlight. You can imagine what this like chaos. The army was attacked from above and in the rear. According to Dr. Bryden, an army surgeon, last vestiges of discipline were swept away and it became every man for himself. Bryden pulled from his horse, and he had a copy of Blackwood's magazine in between his hat and his head to try to stay warmer, because they lost some of their clothing. They got stabbed and had a head wound, scrambled through the thorn bush and came across a terribly wounded subadar of a horse and still clutching the bridle and tried to get out of there. One version of the story is he kind of escaped on his own. The probably true version is the version where they grabbed him and they said, I'm going to let you live, but I got a message for you. So then we start, and so here in 1921, we didn't quite figure out that the first and the second war weren't going to work. Let's do it again a third time, 3 strikes and you're out. But look at this, and this is a quote from Kipling related to what happened in the Third War. When you're wounded and left on Afghanistan's plains and the women come out to cut up your remains, just roll on your rifle and blow out your brains and go to your God like a soldier. I mean, it was rough. And they have these dispatches from the soldiers saying, oh my God, this is the worst of the worst of the worst. So they finally left. And the reason for the incursion was the same thing, part of the Great Game. The Brits were worried, understandably, about the Russian Empire, incursions through Afghanistan, interrupting the trade route, getting to a warm water port in the Arabian Sea, and maybe making designs on India. So we understand why they went back, but it was a mistake. Okay, so here's another picture of, this was the Third War where they, I don't remember the story behind this, but anyway. So now let's zoom through modern history and then show you some pictures. So now modern history. King Nadir Khan inherits the throne. 54. Now this, people always, you go back and you say, oh, we should have been nice to Ho Chi Minh because he came to us first, right? Vietnam before he went to the Russians. We said, get out of here. Could have been different. Anyway, 1954. The Afghans came to us to say, we'd like some help because the Russians are right on our border and we've got a military and we think they have designs on us. And we said, No, go away. Anyway, so 55, they turned to the USSR to get assistance. 65, they form a communist party, which had to be secret because the Afghans are Muslim and, you know, they're monotheistic and they believe in God. And this, remember the communists? They didn't believe in God. So while in Europe, King Shah is overthrown by a military coup, 73, supported by soldiers in the Communist Party. This is all dirty, nasty, international stuff. 73 to 79, the Russians are in there with their spies and everybody else, causing all kinds of problems inside Afghanistan through their agents. And it's 1979, Christmas Eve, they invade. Okay? They invade. The first thing they do is they go into Kabul and they kill, I can't remember what's his name, and all his family. They took over the radio stations and stuff. What was going on in December of 1979? Jimmy Carter was president, and I'm sure he's great, but he was president, not perceived as a strong leader. We were in the middle of the Iranian hostage crisis. So we were very preoccupied. The Soviets were smart. They wanted a warm water port, they wanted Afghanistan, they wanted a buffer zone. What better time to invade, you know? So we didn't do anything about it, right? Well, what did we do? We kept our athletes from going to the Russian Olympics. So we punished our athletes, and to punish the Russians for invading Afghanistan. I thought that was lame, but I wasn't president.
What did you expect?
So anyway, so that's the beginning. So now, here's the Soviet Union, the second most powerful superpower on earth, right? Huge, powerful. Common border with Afghanistan, the size of Texas, and at the time 16 million people, population of Texas at the time. And they go to war with this little country of farmers. How do you think that goes? Doesn't go well. Doesn't go well. It's an amazing story. So, USSR war with Afghanistan. Now, let's face it, we, behind the scenes, gave them a lot of help. Later on, we gave them Stingers, which really worked with these Hind helicopters. And I've seen the Hind helicopters. I was there. They're really scary. The Arab countries, here's the deal. They gave a lot of covert aid. The Chinese gave tons of aid because the Chinese at the time were worried about the the Soviets, of course. So the Americans, the Chinese, and some of the Arab countries gave the Afghans aid. They didn't give them soldiers, but they gave them aid and money and Stingers and stuff like that. So 88 to 89. The Soviet Union withdraws after losing between 40 and 50,000 Soviet soldiers. Killed, not all the maiming and everything else. And the Afghans were brutal with the Soviets. But the Soviets were the perfect enemy for the Afghans, right? I already told you about Afghan history. What do Afghans hate? Godless people. You don't believe in God? I've got my eye on you. You're an invader from another country? My grandfather fought against the British. My great-grandfather fought against the British. My great-great-greats fought against, they don't like invaders. They don't like outsiders coming in to take control. They don't like godless people. Soviets were the perfect enemy. The Afghans hated them. They have to be terrible because they're godless. So, and the stories are legion. Anyway, and then of course, 89, 90, the Soviets go bankrupt, and that's the end of that. In part because of this expensive, difficult war. And then we move into the modern times and explain what's going on now. So here you got all these tough Afghans, right? They kick out the Soviets. So now you got a bunch of people who were farmers, or they're off and on farmers, and now they're hardened warriors. So who was in there? The Arab countries were in there. The Saudis sent a lot of support into Afghanistan, and a lot of, you help me, Bill knows a lot about the Mideast. Wahhabi trained some fighters, and a lot of people that go in there and say, hey, we could do a new jihad, let's make this a religious war, okay? So it got very complicated, and the Wahhabi groups and the fundamentalist Muslim groups saw the Afghans as a potential for how do we go against the Western world, how do we start a jihad? So that's kind of what we're dealing with now. I mean, my impression of the Afghans when I was there, they were nice, they were kind, they were loyal, they were decent. They didn't really want to do anything outside, and I'll explain about that. But a lot of the fundamentalist Muslim incursions occurred coming from the Arab countries, and things began to change. So in '92, communist Afghan forces, well, you know that They had communist Afghans. They hung around for a while, but they got rid of them. Then we had Afghan self-rule. And then, in 1994, there's a lot of chaos, right? Because the Russians left, and there's fighting and all this, and the people are saying, we want to get back to our farms, let's have a little... That's how the Taliban got there. The Taliban, the fundamentalist group, came in and said, we're going to help you, we're going to establish order, well, we're Muslim too, and we'll help you set everything up. They took control. The Afghans said, oh, this is great, well here, you can have control. And what did they do? The first thing they did was they took away a lot of the liberties that the Afghans already had and had established. And what do you think their number one mistake, what I think the number one mistake the Taliban made when they took over Afghanistan, and the Afghans revolted and kicked the Taliban out? They made Bushkazi illegal.
Oh, wow.
I told you about Bushkazi. They love that more than we love American football. They said, no, that's not good, that's not part of Islam. You got to get rid of that stupid game. And the Afghans are going, excuse me? You know, interesting story. They did all kinds of things. They took away women's rights. They did all kinds of stuff. So by '96, the Taliban controlled most of the countryside. Who were they? They were hired by Islamabad in 1994 to protect a convoy setting up a trade route between Pakistan and Central Asia. They were a little bit of kind of mercenary type guys. The group was comprised of Afghans trained in radical religious schools in Pakistan and in Saudi Arabia. What are they called? Wahhabis?
Madrasas.
Madrasas, excuse me, madrasas. Radical schools. Some of these guys are Afghans, but they went over there and they got radicalized and they came back and said, oh, I'll be a law and order guy for you. Effectively protected the convoy. And then next took the city of Kandahar. So they proceeded to sort of quietly take over. Everybody's saying, hey, what are you doing? They said, oh no, we're just here to help with law and order. '96, they took over control of the capital. And they started saying, we're not, because the Afghans educated women. No, we're not, take your little girl out of school, we're not doing that anymore. You can't play Bushkazi anymore. You cover your face, you're a woman. Taliban initially popular because they were law and order. And then things changed. So what they wanted to do was to establish the world's purest Islamic state, and they thought, well, let's do it here in Afghanistan. In their eyes, it meant the establishment of TV, cinema, music, all these things that the Afghans had promoted over the years, they got rid of them. And they started having amputations, beatings, public executions. So what happened is the real Afghans, who were the, you know, they began to revolt. Now, this guy, so what happened was the other Afghans, the basic Afghans, began to fight against them. And the problem is after the Soviets left, we could have been there helping the Afghans, you know, like the real Afghans, kind of reestablish things. We left, we didn't do anything. We were busy with other stuff, so there was a lot of chaos. Maybe if we'd been involved more, there wouldn't have been a radical element that sort of took over, and maybe the Soviets, you know. It might have been a different story, who knows. But there were some really cool guys. This guy, Shah Ahmad Massoud, anybody heard of him? The first American doctor that went in with IMC was the guy before me, and only two of us went in. He actually went into the Panjshir Valley, spent his time in there setting up some clinics, and met Massoud. And he was called the Lion of the Panjshir. Look at this quote from this Muslim man, okay? We have not ceased to insist that an Islam of tolerance is advantageous to all Muslims, for the Afghans and the whole world, and we will always defend it. He came from the school of, no, Islam is a religion of peace. We want to be tolerant of others, just like the Middle Ages, where, you know, the Muslim world kept art and science and medicine and everything going, and they were very tolerant. He said, no, this is nonsense. We don't want a jihad. We don't need radical, all this. He was completely against it. He was a great ally of the Americans, a great friend of the Americans. And he fought all through. He was one of the reasons why the Soviets didn't win. He was a great commander. He was a young engineering student in Kabul who was from the Panjshir Valley. Smart guy. And then the Russians invaded in '79, and he said, oh, well, another invader, my grandfather fought against the British and his grandfather, so I guess I'll go home, I'll leave engineering school, I'll go back to Panjshir, and I'll fight against the Soviets, which is what he did. You should read about him. He's stunning, like an amazing Robin Hood type of guy. Took care of the people, very friendly with the Americans. So this whole period of chaos after the Soviets left, he was the American ally. On the other side were the radical Mideast origin, radical jihad type of people, and they ended up prevailing. So what happens? Massoud is talking to us, and he's saying, you know, my information, you've got to be careful. Now we're getting to September 11th. He says, I think they're planning a big attack against America. 2 days before 9/11, 2 days before 9/11, Taliban agents who were disguised as European photographers to go in and interview him. Everybody wanted to meet Massoud. People from all over the world wanted to go to the Panjshir Valley to meet the great lion of the Panjshir. They went in there with exploding cameras, and they blew up and they killed Massoud, our ally, 2 days before 9/11, to prepare for the fact that they didn't want somebody supporting America in Afghanistan when they were going to whack the towers, because they thought, you know, that would be a big deal. So he was assassinated, and that was the bad thing. Here's another quote. Well, no, this is about him. But he was into peace. He didn't want the Soviets in Afghanistan, but he said, no, Islam is a religion of peace, you know, and tolerance. Resistance leader who fought against the Soviets in the 80s, also he fought against a fundamentalist interpretation of Islam. He was assassinated 2 days before 9/11 after warning the United States of a major terrorist attack set to happen, through his sources.
And we did listen to you.
Now, this is not my photograph. Actually, this is not my photograph either, nor is that. There are 3 photographs on mine. So what happens after this? We get the radical fundamentalist elements with this guy and others prevail in Afghanistan, and it becomes a hiding place, and that's where they set up shop. Right? And they're telling the Afghans, they're saying, hey, we're like you, we're all the same. The Afghans are like, I'm not sure you're all the same, but anyway, that's why we're in Afghanistan. But it's sad because the original Afghan deal, it was different. You know, they were more like Massoud, hey, leave us alone, don't invade. If you invade us, you're in trouble. We have no designs outside our country. And the Afghans throughout history never invaded anywhere. They never went anywhere. So that's what happened, and that's why we're there now, and went there because there's some bad guys and stuff. So anyway, International Medical Corps, 84. The Mets, after the Soviet invasion, one of the first things the Soviets did, they went and they took all these, they had a nice rural healthcare system with clinics and kind of barefoot doctors and FMPs and doctors. Soviets went around and gathered all these people up and took them into Kabul. They took them all away. And the infrastructure, and they said, oh, the Afghans will roll over now because we took away all their medical care and everything else. Well, they didn't study Afghan history. Well, but the French being French, here's what happened. You know, the Afghans appreciated it. They said, well, thank you so much for coming in and bringing medical care, but I'm sorry, but the French nurses were out in the courtyard with like no bras, and the French doctors and the French nurses were doing things, you know, like in the open and late at night, and it got to be a cultural issue, you know. They were culturally insensitive in that regard. And so the tribal leaders got together and said, you know what, I love these guys, they're great, they're helping us, but they cannot be doing these nasty things in our, like, conservative thing. They politely asked them to leave. They said, thank you very much, but you gotta go, you can't be running around. So they left, they were kicked out. And then Bob Simon, and some other people started International Medical Corps. So, and what they did was they said, we're gonna go in there, we're very culturally sensitive, and we're gonna help you out and establish clinics. So I was the second American doctor to go in. In 85, I spent, you know, a couple of months inside. I was smuggled in. I was passed from one commander to another. This is during the Soviet occupation. And I set up 3 different clinics. And went first to Peshawar, Pakistan, where I had with my interpreter, had intensive learn Pashto. Pashto is a fairly simple language. You can learn medical Pashto, you know, learn a lot of words in a few months. And then when the time was right, smuggled across Miran Shah into Afghanistan. And I'll show you some of these pictures. And what I did was I helped to train some medics. We mainly set up clinics so that Afghan medics that were being trained in Pakistan could come over and take over the clinics. So now we're looking at Afghanistan, and what we did first, I flew to Islamabad and then to Peshawar. And in Peshawar is where we had the staging operation, got everything together, cooperated, you know, talked to the commanders inside, because during the war, this border was like a Civ border. The Soviets were in here, and there was constant back and forth. So you'd go, you'd work on your crops. You'd be a fighter, right? You'd work on the crops for a while. Then you go fight the Russians for a couple of months. Then you go into Pakistan and buy new supplies. And you go about more crops, then fight some more. They were doing different things. So there was a lot of activity supporting the war that was here, particularly Peshawar. Then went to Miran Shah, which I'll show you. And I ended up in Paktia province, which is over here, and we set up 3 clinics here. I don't know if you've heard of Host. That was a famous battleground for the Soviets. Tora Bora, that's where they have all those caves and things. I've got some pictures of those caves too. Anyway, so these are my photographs. This is Peshawar looking down from the hotel. Just a typical Pakistani city. Very interesting place. That's me in the Khyber Bazaar. There's a Pakistani policeman. The Khyber Bazaar is ancient, and that's where the Silk Route was. And it's a wonderful place. You can buy anything and everything. It's outside the modern part of the city, and they've been traders there for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's an ancient, exotic place. Here's a minaret, and this is one of the trading areas. So 200 years before, there were camels down here, right, and goats and stuff. Now there are trucks and things, a minaret, which is, you know, a mosque. And then if you go to the Peshawar Museum, you'll see that these old weapons that these guys, elders used to fight against the British, and before that. This is just another picture of the bazaar. You know, very exotic. You can buy everything from a bicycle to daggers to shoes to whatever. And these are little, this is how you get around. This has got 3 wheels, and the guy drives it, and you sit back here, and it only cost a few Pakistani rupees to go around town. This is outside it. And I thought this was a funny one. Look at this. This guy's got this truck, but there's no engine, and his guys are, and he's just going down the street, you know. Typical kind of third world scene. It was interesting. And that's my interpreter, Haji Aref, in Peshawar. I'm sorry, that's my interpreter, Haji Aref. That's one of our other guys. And look at this guy, a vestige left over from the British. This is a little guy who was ex-British military, and he's playing the bagpipes. Anyway, here's a picture. So here's this is mountainous terrain. This is Afghanistan here, right? And then here's Iran and India and Pakistan. So you can see how rugged Afghanistan is, and you can see why, yeah, you can fight a war in Afghanistan if you're going to hide from guys with high-powered weapons. And this is Miran Shah. After we left Peshawar, when we were really ready to move across the border, after we had all our supplies, this is Miran Shah. In Peshawar, proper Afghanistan, you didn't have any guns or anything like that because everything's under control. But you move into the northwest frontier northwest frontier territories, even though it's part of Pakistan, it's controlled by the tribal people like Afghanistan. And the Pakistani police and army are afraid to go there for good reason. So everybody here is armed. Everybody's got guns. Nobody tells anybody else what to do, right? This is where we staged. This is about 12 miles from the actual border. And that's where we picked up our bodyguards and got our horses together. And this is Miran Shah looking down from the hill. There's another little mosque. And one of the other things, there were tents everywhere because there were a lot of refugees coming out of Afghanistan, the Soviet bombing and everything else. And this is, where am I? Oh, that's me, my little hat. And I had a beard, and I had, you know, sideburns that were dyed dark because I was supposed to try to, at least from a distance, look. That's my interpreter's father. This is in Miran Shah at his house. That's Herkai, one of my bodyguards. That's Kazima, another bodyguard. That's Haji Aref. That's my interpreter who was with me the entire time. And this is how you eat. You put out a deal, and the women cook it all, right, ladies? And then they disappear. And then the young boys bring the food in. The women don't bring it. The young boys, it's a big honor. Oh, the American doctor's here, and my grandfather's here. And they bring in the food, and you sit on the floor, and you eat your food. There's my interpreter. That's this little girl. This is before leaving. This is about a day or two before leaving. And she didn't want her father to go into Afghanistan because she knew that was a tough place. This is me, and we're palling around, listening to the radio. That's his younger brother. That's my interpreter. And then here's on the road. This is just after we cross in the border. And the border is fairly loose. You're not going in through the Soviet checkpoints, obviously. You're going in through rugged border. And I dressed like an Afghan. So if you were, you know, within 50 yards of me, it's obviously I'm not an Afghan. But if you're looking from over here, I just look like anybody else because I had a beard. They told me to grow a beard, and it was dyed dark, and my hair was dyed dark. And I wore the typical clothing, and these are 2 of my bodyguards. And we did a lot of walking. This is pointing into the entrance to Gardez. This is Paktia province. As we come over the major group, the first group of mountains, this is about 10 miles inside the border. And this was when I got in there, and I was with the bodyguards and the interpreters, and everybody's smoking. And I'd sit there like an idiot talking. I go, you know, this after the shoot. And then came in here, and about a mile or two before this, we started to come in. It was the first time I heard the bombing at Host. Host is about 3 miles up this road here. Host was a big base, where well, they were called rebels. They weren't. They were Afghans, constantly attacking the Soviet base and stuff, and there was always chaos. And I've never been in the military, and I've never heard bombing. But coming up there, I'm with these guys, and there are only about 8 of us going in. You know, and then we got these horses and some camels and supplies. And I hear the, and it's way over there. It's like miles away, and the ground is kind of shaking. I turn to my guys, and I'm like, they go, inshallah, no problem. They're bombing Host, you know, or that's the bombing from Host. The rebels are over there, and they're probably bombing them. But I never felt anything like that. You could feel the power of this way away. And I immediately got scared to death. I thought, and I thought, oh, it's a big adventure. First thing I thought, what am I doing? I said, I cannot believe, I don't even know these people that I'm with, and they all have weapons and knives. They seem nice enough. I'm just a stupid little doctor. I'm going into this, and I reached to my, Muhammad Aref was my interpreter. I go, Muhammad, give me one of the cigarettes. And I started smoking. And it was like the instant automatic. Yeah. And I smoked, and the whole time I was in there, I smoked. And I smoked, and I smoked, and I smoked. The day I left, I stopped smoking, but it's a, you know, and I wondered about it, because in Islam, you're not supposed to smoke. It's naughty, but they all smoke. And it was a stress deal. And I smoked, because it was a deal, you know. So this is, there's a little donkey with my supplies, and that's me, and that's Wally John, one of the bodyguards. And this is coming to rugged terrain. This is me on the horse. And this is Haji Razi. He was one of the local commanders. What they would do is when you come into a region, we went into 3 different regions, and there would be a local commander. And so they'd pass you, I always said there were always 2 bodyguards, I always had. And then you come into a commander's region, he'd give you a couple of his, and they're there to protect you, and then you travel with them until you set that clinic. When you go into another region, you lose those guys, and you get some new protection. The local commanders, they take care of you. The committee takes care of you. And we had this horse, well, we had several horses. Back around here are some of the camels and horses. This is me, you know, and this, I felt bad because this was one of the commander's father who insisted, he could barely walk, you know. And I said, you take the horse. And he'd go, oh no, American doctor, you have to ride the horse, you know. So you did it almost out of politeness. There we are again, and they taught me how to wear a turban, and they said, no, wear the turban, because if anybody's up here, they'll just think you're another Afghan. This is Herkai, and that's his little brother, and that's another one of the bodyguards. And they're always hangers on, you know. But look at that. That's Paktia province, right over in this valley is where we set up the first clinic. Very rugged. So, and you could hear and see the Hind helicopters flying, and those are big Russian attack helicopters, and you could see the MiGs flying. Fortunately, when I was in there, the Americans had already started to give stingers to the Afghan resistance, which meant the Hind helicopters were flying higher because they knew about the stingers, and the MiGs were flying higher. So you were at less risk, but the way they protected themselves, you saw in one of the previous pictures I had like this brown wrap thing, or tan wrap thing, and they all carried them. The Hind helicopters would come over, and your first impression would be, oh, I'm going to run hide. They said, no, you don't do that. Second, you hear them, and they're mechanically very loud. So you see them as a couple of dots, so they don't really see you. What they did was they said, you squat, you get down like this, you pull your thing over the top of you, and you look like a rock, and you just stay there until they pass. So that's what we did, and I'm thinking, wait, I'm out in the open, but they were smart. If you move and run, there's motion, right? Yeah. If you just cramp down and put this thing on top of you, you look like a rock, and it worked. So it's just more, and this was, see the terracing? Here's a little village here, and this is what Afghanistan looks like. You've got all your terrace, these areas, and you grow your crops, and here's your little village. This is right outside. They didn't put our clinics in the villages because they were always targets, you know. So the clinic would always be established like half a mile from a village, so they weren't an obvious target. And this was the village, I can't remember the name, but this is where we had the first clinic. And all kinds of little shanty things, and this is very interesting, the sheep and the goats, because they actually were your protection. The Soviets would mine some of the trails they knew that the Afghans used. they would mine them at night. At night is not, you've got to be careful at night, so you kind of hunker down. And what the Afghans would do is they would use their, and they'd move, if they needed to move, like soldiers would be moving through an area, they would take the sheep herd ahead of you. And the sheep herd would, or the goat herd would set off whatever mines might be there. Smart. And you know, you lose a few, but at least you didn't lose mujahideen. And that, see, that's Muhammad Aref, that's my interpreter. How many times a day, you know, look what he's doing. He's praying. And he's facing what direction, Bill? Towards Mecca, I guess, right? And so they told him, when I went in there, and we had a lot of acculturation, don't do this, make sure you don't do that, because you have to be very careful. And they said, I wasn't married at the time, I wouldn't have gone in married, but they said, you have to tell them you're married. I go, well, I'm not married. It doesn't matter. They're going to ask you, are you married? Of course I'm married. And show me a picture of your wife. That was my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And do you have children? And you say, yeah, I have a couple of children. I don't need pictures. So, because they want to know, and are you a believer? You're damn right I'm a believer. I believe in the same God you believe in. But what was cool was, I didn't have to say I was Muslim. They didn't care. They didn't care if I was Jewish. That was interesting. We had a lot of discussions about this. As long as I believed in the same God they believed in. I told them I was Catholic. Oh yeah, we've heard of that. And they joke, you know, we joke at night eating, they say, oh, Dr. Brown, you need to become Muslim, you're missing one prophet. That was their deal. Because Jesus is one of their prophets, so is Moses. They were fine with my being Catholic. I was just a little bit behind, a little ignorant, was the deal. And but I said, no, I like being Catholic. They go, oh, whatever, that's good. But they weren't against me because I was Christian. They weren't against me because I was Catholic. They weren't against Jewish people. Same, but they didn't like the Soviets because they didn't believe in God. That was a crime. So there I am, and this is Herkai and Haji Razi, and that's my interpreter over there. And you notice I'm not armed. I was never armed because if I was caught or they came in or something, I would be an armed combatant, and that's a bad thing. But if the Soviets had captured me like they did the French doctor a couple of years before, and you're armed, your category changes, right? Then you're in trouble. But if I'm not armed, oh, you're one of these crazy humanitarian people, you're just a whack job, but maybe we can trade you off or something. But these guys, I was convinced these guys were very nice to me, and I had no doubt that if we got into a situation, I think they would have died for me, trying to protect me. Tea houses. What you do is you go along, you hike along the road to get where you're going, then you come to a tea house, and the men drink tea. They drink tea all day long. And little bitty tea things, and it's got tons of sugar in it, and it's tea from China, and you rest, and you eat stuff, but look at all these weapons. And this is Kazima, and his little brother, and these are bandoliers, and here's another picture. See, this guy's armed, everybody's armed. And they're all farmers. They're not like professional soldiers, they're farmers. And they're doing what they were taught. They're expelling invaders, godless invaders who were the Soviets. So they thought I was great. This is right before the valley, before Host. And this is a tea house. It's just a bunch of fabric up here on some stands, and waking up in the morning, this is a mat. Here's a little lantern here looking out into the valley. And it was interesting. This is me, and this is my interpreter. See, he's armed. And then another one of the guards. And it's so fascinating because you would find bombs everywhere. And the way the Mujahideen explained it to me, that the Russians were not very good at building bombs. There were a lot of unexploded bombs. So they'd drop bombs on them, some would explode, some would just sit there. And they were very clever. They'd take these bombs, they'd dismantle them, they'd take the explosives out, and they'd make improvised weapons, right? And here's, this guy is cool. I can't remember his name. Anyway, here's a bomb that didn't explode, that they bastardized. This guy was actually quite famous. I think he's dead now. But he was one of the commanders in Paktia province who was quite famous because his deal was, the Soviets came in with tanks, planes and stuff. And the tanks, the problem with the tanks was they didn't really, early on in the war, didn't have anti-tank weapons, so they couldn't do much about them. So the solution was they'd tease the tank groups to come into some of these valleys, and they'd be hiding behind the rocks and stuff. And a guy like him, and I remember the other guys telling me stories about him, they got their Molotov cocktail, right? And they're looking, and they're seeing which way the visor of the tank is. And he starts running. He runs out there, right? And somebody goes, oh, and the other thing was they would stay buttoned up because the Afghan, sharpshooters behind the rocks are going to, if you're up sticking your stupid head out of the turret, they're going to blow your head off. So they're buttoned up, so all they can see is looking out. But if you're fast enough, you've got the edge, you see which way the things are looking, you run out there with your bottle, with some Molotov cocktail, and you run and you climb on this tank and you go, whoom, and it's gasoline or whatever, and that gas seeps into that tank, and then you wait for these guys to come out. And they're shooting and trying to, but you stay out of their sight. And so a lot of the early tank warfare was done like this. Now, I don't know that I got the courage to go run after a tank when there are others around, try to climb on there and, but that's what they did. They're very fearless people. And there was all kinds of stuff all over the place. This is a thing off of a tank, and this is like a little rocket-propelled grenade and grenades. The stuff is all over the place, and blown up trucks, and these guys think it's a big hoot. They bring, hey, doctor, look what I got. And this is my interpreter. This is inside one of the commander's houses outside where we set up the clinic, and you see their weapons everywhere. This is me. This is a...
That was your gun, huh?
Well, yeah, that's my gun. This is actually a patient who had, I think, cerebral malaria. They told us about him, and we hiked up a couple of valleys over and gave him IV quinine, and he got better. But this guy had one of these in his backyard. And for fun, if they heard the hinds or the mix, the old man would get out and he'd run over there, and he only had like, 5 rounds or something. He'd sit on that thing and he'd wheel it around and he'd shoot at whatever it was. These were Chinese, and they were everywhere. The Chinese gave a lot of weapons to the Afghans. So they were all over the place. And I'm sure they gave the Afghans fits. This was a typical evening thing. You worked in clinic all day. I mean, we call it clinic. You're sitting on the floor. It's a mud hut. There's my interpreter. There's Kazima. There's Wali John. He was my favorite. He was a great guy. That's me. And we're eating. But notice, on the road, when we're out at the clinic, actually, there weren't any women there. The women were in villages. But the younger guys would fix the meal. And we're sitting outside eating and telling stories. And what they want to talk about, they want to talk about the war. And they want to talk about... They come to me and they say, Dr. Brown, and through my interpreter, you've got to go back and you've got to tell who was the president in 1985. Is it Reagan?
Yeah, Reagan.
You have to go see Mr. Reagan, and here's what I want you to tell him. I go, okay.
Yeah.
And, that's the way it worked. They thought I go, okay, well, that sounds good. You want 2 trucks, okay.
Yeah.
And this is me, and these are the bodyguards, and there's the commander guy, and there's my interpreter, and a lot of guy stuff, The guys are always hanging out, the guys are telling stories, and the guys are smoking, and we're drinking tea, and talking about the war, and the women are not to be seen. Here we are again. That's Wali John. That's this guy. His father fought in the Second Anglo-Afghan War, and he would tell you all about it. And this is Herkai and my interpreter. This is inside our first clinic. See, it's just a rock wall they built. And there'd be a lot of hangers-on, so you're in there seeing patients, and the little boys, they come and hey, I want to see the American doctor, and they just hang, and they bring you little gifts. They bring you like little apples and stuff like that. And then the other thing, now, I was not a combatant, but they're a very tough society. What they want to do is they want you to look tough. Doctor, we gotta, get you all fixed up. So they get you up and they wanted to take pictures. I have millions of these pictures. I go like, I'm not really supposed to look like a combatant. Well, I go, no problem. They put a bandolier and they give you a gun and they make sure your turban's all okay. So everybody's taking pictures of the macho thing and stuff. So this really wasn't how I hung out, but if they wanted me to take a picture looking like a tough guy, I'd help them out. And there I am, oh, hold this gun while we take a picture. So this is an Indian AK-47. That's my interpreter's brother. And they're very hardworking. They take their picks and build a path to the clinic. There's our first clinic. That's my interpreter. This is just a rock clinic hidden by the trees. They always had to think about where the hinds or the MiG's going to see something like this from the air. So they're always away from the... And this is where 2 of my bodyguards slept. 2 would sleep inside with me. They wouldn't let me sleep outside. 2 would sleep on the roof, and 2 would sleep in this tent right outside the clinic. This is a wonderful picture. This is an old Soviet parachute that they used, and this, this is anyway. They were well hidden. And this we had rules. You know, International Medical Corps not negotiate with the Afghans, but taught them about, you got this guy in there, now here's what you got to do. You got to protect him and this and that. And they told him, they said, look, every place you go where you settle for a few days, there has to be a hiding place. If the Hinds come and if they're going to land, because what they would do, they'd look for aid workers and people like that, because it's good for Afghan morale. They don't want them there. A French physician was taken 2 years before, and the government had negotiated to get him back. After I left, 8 months after I left, they sent in an American nurse practitioner who was going to set up clinics. And he and his group of 12, including his bodyguards, there was an attack at night on their little clinic area by Spetsnaz. They were all killed. And after that, the government went to IMC and they said, you're not sending any more American personnel inside Afghanistan. And then they got monies, and that's how it ended but changed. Now IMC is huge, federally funded. It's huge, they're all over the world. Anyway, so here's my hiding place in the second clinic. And there's a little thing under this root, but it turns and there's a little teeny cave there. So they were instructed, if it looks dicey and you hear the Hind helicopters, you get him out of the clinic, you go 100 yards to this place and you hide him there and you protect him. So what would happen is we'd be in there and I'd be seeing patients and doing this, and you could hear these Hinds from way off. And I'd hear it, and I'd go, oh, it sounds like they're coming this way. And I turn to Mohammed Aref, my interpreter, go, oh, you hear that? Oh, yeah. And I turn to Herkai, one of the bodyguards, can I hear that? And they go, oh, Doctor, it's always, oh, Doctor, inshallah. It's always, God, you know, whatever God does. If we're to die, we're to die. And I'd sometimes have to argue. I go, you remember the rules? It's getting louder. The rule is we leave the clinic and we go to this place. Oh, Doctor said. And I swear to God, they had no fear. They said it's all about God, which is, I think is wonderful. But no, whatever it is, God, inshallah, it's okay. If it's our time to die, it's our time to die. Don't think it's my time to die. So when you hear that, you get out, and the people would stay in the clinic. But I'd get out with the body, and I'd go do what I was supposed to do. And this is me sitting under the thing. We're eating a little midday break. There's my interpreter. I'll keep going. This is our clinic. Look how primitive this is. These are medicines. Most of the medicines were Chinese. And you'd sit here and you'd see a patient. He'd interpret for me. And we're in here. And this is cool. See the little apples? These are the guys. These are tough little Afghan boys. And they wanted to come see what this American doctor does. So they'd hang out. They were like groupies, you know? And these are two of the guys, and they're fixing dinner or lunch. That's a chicken. A lot of interesting stuff. See this? These are scars on this man's back with back pain. And there's this certificate. Well, there are a lot of shamans that set up, a lot of smoke and mirrors guys say, oh, you give me $10, I'll fix your back pain. And they would burn things on your back. They'd take a hot thing and they'd burn things. So I saw a lot of that kind of odd primitive medicine stuff. And they had back pain because they're carrying weapons all the time. A lot of peptic ulcer disease, a lot of back pain. I didn't see war wounds because you get hit by a high velocity AK-47, you're either dead or it's a minor wound. So I didn't see wounds, and I wasn't taken to the war zones, although we had some dicey experiences. This little girl who I'm looking at here, you can't see now because of the lights, but she's got a depressed skull fracture in the back, but she survived it. She's got burns. See these burns? She was challenged because she'd been in a house, and the Soviets, every village they could see, they would strafe for bomb. I mean, it was a kind of a terror campaign thing, you know? And so the thing fell in on her, and she lived, but she was burned, depressed skull fracture, and I guess she was mentally challenged. But look, she's got these beautiful clothes that her mother made for her and stuff. We saw a lot of this little boy, that's my interpreter, me, look at the ever-present AK-47 that he keeps, and then their bodyguards outside, in case bad guys like the Soviets or the Afghan plants that went to the dark side, were working for the Soviets and wandering around. Anyway, he had half his arm was gone, and we didn't do this, but he developed chronic osteo and had these draining fissures and stuff. So some of this we actually arranged. We had caravans with horses and camels and stuff, and some of these people who needed further attention, we had a way of getting them. We sent him to Peshawar, to a doctor, that was, you know, supervised by IMC, so he actually got medical care. He lost that arm. But he had chronic osteo, and that was from, he was in a village when it was bombed. This little girl, look at these beautiful clothes looking in her ears, and then this is me. This is how you clean up. And it's cold, okay? And the funny thing was, like, I go, like, you want to shower? And they go, yeah, just go down to the pond there. But this is like these trails. So you're down there in the buff, cleaning up, and there are people, like, walking by, and, you know, with their horse and their donkey, and the guy's wife, and the kids, and, oh, there's the American doctor taking a bath, you know. But you get used to it. And then the other thing, you know, we had medicines, mainly Chinese, and that's for the Afghans. But they were, you know, their livelihood are their farms and their animals. That donkey's important to you, right? That's how you make money. So they'd come and they'd say, oh, please come look at my donkey. And I'd explain again and again. I go, listen, I'll look at you. We can't use these are people medicines. We have to use it. Oh, but if I want to have my donkey. So we had to play games. You know, we had to go out, and I went and examined this guy's donkey. Everybody's looking along, what's wrong with it? And you'd have to say, well, he's got a migraine, just do that. And a lot of pictures, you know. My donkey's got a wound, so you do a little bandage. You have to help him out. You do something. And then here, this is a camel. And see how far away I'm standing from this camel? You have to go through the motions. Oh, doctor, my camel, da-da-da. And you go, oh, God, I can't believe I got to go examine this camel. So here I'm listening to the camel. I don't even know if the heart's on this side. But they're nasty. They bite, they spit, they kick. And my interpreter warned me, said, be careful when you... So look how I am. I'm like leaning forward, and I'm like, Aref, you watch this damn camel's head. There's a camel's head. And then you talk to the guy, but look, this camel, look, see this leg? I think he had elephantiasis. Oh. He had lymphedema of the leg. Yeah. And he said, you've got to give me some medicine for my camel. I go, look, it's people medicine. I can't do anything, but you make stuff up. You go, feed him some cranberries and he'll be fine. So anyway, there it is. See? Look at that leg. It was horrible. So this happened a lot. And then sometimes, and the other thing you understand, if it's a local commander's sister or brother whose camel is sick, you need to get up and go out and see him. The other people say, look, I'm busy with all these patients. I wish you well, but you're sick donkey, you know. But this guy, this is the commander's brother. It's his camel, right? So you get up, politely go out and check his camel. And then I woke up one morning, and this morning scared the bejesus out of me. I woke up and I'm looking out the window taking this picture, and I hear this, and like vomit sounds and hollering and guttural, horrible sounds, and I thought, oh shit. You know, we've been covered, they're attacking the house or this. And I woke up like this, my interpreter woke up and ran to the window. And this is, these are the guys, and this is a female, newly pregnant camel. They find out she's pregnant. They hamstring her, right? And then they tackle her, and she's down, she can't do anything. They open her mouth, and they shove chickens and food and herbs down her mouth, and she's complaining. She's like coughing and gagging, and they say, oh no, we've got to build a strong baby. And it was a horror, and the kids, of course, are looking at they've been choking this camel, but that's what you do when you find out your camel's pregnant. And then, again, it's a guy's society. This is one of the houses. Somebody's getting married, so I get invited. Oh, you got to, you know, get that American doctor. All these, you know, leave your shoes outside and go inside. And eat with the guys. You see any women here? No. That's me. Oh, wait, yeah, that's me right there. See with my little hat on? That's one of my bodyguards. And these are the guys from the village, another bodyguard. And we're celebrating, there's all this food. The women cook, you don't see them. They prepare all this food. Then the young boys, it's an honor for the boy to come serve the men, right? So the young boys come out like this, and they put the food down, and they fill up your glass. And this is on the road. Now look at this. This is Razi, one of the commanders from the 2nd Clinic. He's holding hands with me. This is me, and I'm carrying my little canteen. That's her guy, and we're moving from the 2nd, I think the 2nd of the 3rd Clinic. And it's very interesting, these cultural things. This guy is tough as nails, you know, he's just this rugged Afghan warrior. But he likes you. Thank you for helping. So he comes up on the trail and, hey, and he grabs your hand and you're walking along like this, you know? And they do it all the time and stuff. And hugs is huge. And they're very affectionate. It was wonderful, I thought. And the other thing is the flower. See the little flower? they'll come up to you, and like this rugged guy will come up to you, and he'll pick a little yellow flower, and he'll come up and he sticks it in your ear. And so there's a lot of that, and I frankly thought it was wonderful. You meet people, you hug them, you leave, you hug them. This is me. I had some medicine for myself. I was taking malaria prophylaxis, and I had some filters, and my interpreter lost my satchel that had all my stuff in it. So I couldn't do anything with the water. So I'm drinking water, and I got horrible giardia as I was leaving the last couple of weeks there, and then when I got back in it. And look at this. This is Hazima's son, one of the commander's son. He's wearing my hat. He was like my little, he'd follow you around, and he'd kind of come watch, and can I go to the doctor's clinic? And this is where we had our second clinic. But he would just hang out all the time. They're very nice to you. Look at this. This is where you're walking a lot, and you're going up and down these hills, you're going from place to place to see patients, and you're exhausted. So they think I was tired. They say, okay, you stop and rest, and get your tea. And then they go to the neighbor's house, and they bring out this stuff, and they look at blankets, and they make you lie down and rest. No, I'm okay, I'm all right, we're good. No, you lie down and rest, And look at this rugged stuff. Now, take a look at this. This is climbing up this is our second clinic. See that little white thing? That's a teeny little tent thing right here. That's our second clinic. And so you figure from the air, hopefully it's not very visible, but the village is right up here. The village is about 1.5 miles away. They didn't want to have the clinics in the village because that would attract the Soviets' attention. And then another pictures of this is inside the second clinic and all the battle flags. There's a picture of Masood, of the Lion of the Panjshir, all our Chinese medicines. And two guys from Host, I took care of their grandfather. I actually removed a stone from their grandfather's penis. I did some interesting things when I was in there that I'm not qualified to do, but I'm the only guy. And they brought this chair. They found this chair. Nobody uses chairs, but there was a chair in the village in Host. And they brought this chair about 18 miles over, and they presented it to the American doctor. Anyway, this is the third clinic, and it's up in they built this, and this is a mud hut. It's up in a canyon, so it's pretty hard to see from the air. And this is early in the morning, people already gathering, and we saw, from daylight to nighttime. And this is me giving this guy a shot. Sometimes you did a lot of placebo stuff, because, I got this and that. And so you do something to give them. We had a lot of, we had like sugar pills and something. You got to help people. You got to give them some hope. You could find real disease and treat the real disease, right? But you could also, you can't have them come in there and do nothing. Say, well, nothing I can do, but you can't do that. So you give them a couple of pills, and they feel like, this is great. The American doctor gave me some pills. I'm going to get better, and they probably did. So there was a lot of that, like placebo medicine, because you got to give them something. But look at this. Here's. That's me giving this guy a shot. There's my interpreter. There's the guys and the little girls, and everybody's hanging out, while the doctor's doing this thing. This is the other third clinic. That's me at the doorway there. This is late in the day. I think we're finishing up. And here's a little baby. Bill Surratt probably doesn't approve of this, but Bill, I tried my best, okay? And that's one of the commanders and his son. And his baby's sick, and we had tons of animals. Here we go. See, here's the flower. That's a cousin giving me a flower. And then everything was, their appearance. It doesn't show well here, but this is ornately decorated. Their weapons are beautiful designs and beads and all these things. Everything's, that's Wally John, my favorite. There's the interpreter, the flower, one of the commanders. There's me with an ever-present cigarette. He's got a cigarette. He's got a cigarette. He's got a cigarette. And then here we are again, a lot of guy hanging out. That's me, that's my interpreter, that's a local commander, his son, and the hanger-on crew. But very rugged territory, a lot of pictures like this. This is kind of the core crew. And then hanging out at night after everything's done. And I'll tell you, it's a man's society. The men get together. And you don't see the women. That's his father whose father had fought in the Second Afghan Anglo War. There he is. And he had a gun. And he was old. And his attitude is, I see a Russian, I'm shooting him. I see him playing. And they'll go out and here come a Hind helicopter that's way up, or a MiG, and they'll run out and they'll take shot. You know, they're not going to hit anything, but they're very fearsome and they're fearless. This is more hugging, you know. And this is outside Host, and this was an interesting story. This is a big open valley, very dangerous. So what you do is, Host is over here, and Host was a fortified Soviet thing which the Afghans would attack all the time. But one of the thoroughfares to get from one place to the next is this mountain range to that one. You got to cross this area. But the Soviets, they told me, the Soviets are methodical. They would do artillery on this trail 10 o'clock every morning and then 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like clockwork. Every day the same thing. So the Afghans go, okay, is it time? And they'd be over in the canyon over here drinking tea. Okay guys, 10:45, let's go. And then they would run with their little sheep herd across here, because at night that could be mine. And the sheep might blow up a mine or two. I never saw that, but I know I went behind plenty of sheep herds. And then they'd walk across. But there were no flyovers, nothing else, because the Soviet thing was so methodical, and the Soviet soldiers didn't want to come out and meet the Afghans. They didn't take prisoners, and they didn't treat them nicely when they had them. So they buttoned up, you know, they didn't want to be out there. And this was interesting because I'm on the back of this horse, and part of the time I walked, and when I was walking, see this trail here, everybody's kind of in a line and most of the guys are behind us. I'm walking and I saw like a stone over here, and I was right next to Kazima, and I go, oh look at that, and I walked off the trail and I ran over, and they go, wow, and one ran and grabbed me, pulled me up, what are you doing? And they gave me a little lecture.
Yeah.
You don't get off the trail because there could be a mine out there. You stay right here where we know it's safe, because the sheep came through here, you're safe here. Stuff like that would happen all the time. This is me with my interpreter here. This is the Host Valley. I'm on this horse, and we're crossing this valley, but you know, I thought, oh my God, we're out in the open. They go, no problem, it's not 3 o'clock, it's not 10 o'clock. And sure enough, when we woke up that morning, you could hear some of the artillery. They only fired off like 5 or 6 things, and then they stopped, and it was time to go. Here's back in the bazaar, the Khyber Bazaar. This is, I don't know what that is. Oh, this is the kid with malaria. See his little brother there? And this is the guy, this is the father in the backyard that had the Chinese anti-aircraft gun. You know, way up in the mountains. But anyway, we gave him IV quinine. And then, of course, they feed you and talk guy stuff and talk about the war. That's cute little, those are his little brothers, you know. And this is a big truck crossing, this is, I have this picture. Anyway, this is just at night. And oh, the little boys would have slingshots. They're too young to have a gun, but you get a slingshot. So if there was a hind flyover, maybe 2 or 3 hinds, and they're way up because by now we have stingers. And so this little boy in the village, he'd run out with his friends and they pick up rocks and they shoot at the helicopters with their slingshots. They're fearsome, tough people. This kid lost his leg, you know, in one of the bombings. I'm sitting in my chair. And then you saw these all over the place. Anybody that had a weapon, or the Chinese had these anti-aircraft weapons, they were all over. Just put them up in a hill, and they'd shoot at anything that came along. And they didn't worry about themselves, you know. There's Wally Johnny, who's my favorite bodyguard. I think he's dead. I think he kind of went a la Taliban later on, you know. Got kind of fundamental, which was really, really sad. And look at these little girls would come in and they just want to watch, you know. And this is the last slide. That's me, of course, being macho with my guys and the pictures. But the woman thing was interesting. They told us, like, if you're on the trail, we're always moving to go and see patients.